What if you could help others to find the power to heal themselves? Physically, emotionally, and spiritually.
When I started teaching my classes, it was in 2002, and I was just doing the past life regressions and contacting the subconscious part. But then as the time went on and we found how powerful this was and what we could do with it, a lot of the students began saying, you know, advanced past life regression doesn't really tell what it's all about. This is so much more than that. We think you should change the name. So it was a few years ago we decided to change the name to Quantum Healing Hypnosis Technique. And this is the healing technique that we've now been teaching it, well, since 2002, that's 12 years.
What if you could time travel with them? Visit mythical places or angelic realms, other worlds, other galaxies. Help others to speak to their higher selves. You can. Dolores has taught thousands of people from across the world how to use QHHT, and now you can learn her method by going directly to dolorescannon.com. And don't forget to mention the discount code MORETALKS. Hey guys, and welcome to another edition of The Kevin Moore Show. Now on today's show, I'm about to be joined by the legendary John Lear. Now I did this interview in person with John, and just to give you a very short background on John, he's spent over 43 years as a commercial pilot and holds the most FAA airman certificates ever issued to a single pilot. Now, John retired in 2001 with over 19,000 hours, having flown almost everywhere in the world except China, Russia, and Antarctica. He flew over 555 combat missions for the CIA in Southeast Asia and holds over 17 world speed records in the Lear jet, set on May 26, 1966. Now, John is schooled in aircraft design, construction, and accident investigation. He has 4 daughters and lives with his wife, a former actress with Warner Bros. In Las Vegas, Nevada. Now, in 2008, John was disabled and now spends most of his time researching the mysteries of our moon, universe, and posting about his career on Facebook as a whistleblower. So, enjoy my interview with John. Well, John Lear, thank you so much for joining us.
My pleasure.
It's great to be here in Vegas and in your home as well. There's so much memories on the walls. There's so much information in all these pictures, and I guess this is just built up over the years. And are you always adding to it as well?
Always adding to it.
Yeah.
The newest thing I put up there is the poster that I showed you of the pictures that Bruce Swartz has taken of the moon.
What's he found on there? Okay,
Bruce Swartz, about a year ago, heard me say that people lived on the moon. And it so intrigued him that he wanted to find out for himself. So he bought a 12-inch telescope and started looking around and thought, he'd found enough evidence that there was something up there. So he went and bought a 14-inch telescope, and he found out by accident that there's a hologram that covers the moon, and it hides all the industrial areas on the moon, and there's huge areas, thousands of buildings, bridges, highways. And he started videotaping those, and Of course, my interest started out many years ago when a friend called from Chicago and said that he'd heard I was interested in the moon and he wanted to show me something. So on one of my trips with American Transair, I ended up in Chicago overnight, called him, went over to his house, and he had a Canadian book called Exploring Space with Binoculars. And in the back of this book there was 5 pictures, a very high resolution, coming from a lunar orbiter. And there's one of the interior north face of Copernicus. Actually 2 photographs, one from directly overhead and one from oblique. And he showed me the overhead one, where there was 5 cylinders about 200 feet high, maybe 50 feet in diameter. They were huge, unmistakably man-made. And when I say man, you know, alien-made, whatever. And so this really intrigued me, that there's something on the moon definitely man-made. A few weeks later, I was looking at the oblique photograph of Copernicus, and I came across, and I was on standby for a flight, and I remember just laying there in bed looking at this photo, and I saw 3 vapor jets coming up. And this meant that there had to be an atmosphere on the moon, because you can't have vapor, visible vapor, without an atmosphere. And I had originally come to the conclusion there was atmosphere on the moon, because there's only about 8 photographs of the moon. They keep them very tightly under control. And there was a photo taken in 1946 by the Lick Observatory. And to the northwest of Endymion, towards the north part of the moon, there was a huge explosion. It not only spread out for miles, but it went up and expanded and then stopped at the atmosphere and spread out. That's when I really started, there must be an atmosphere on the moon. And incidentally, along that area, about 2 months ago, Yerkes Observatory, one of the most recognized and really good observatories, one of the earliest observatories, on their website, they had a picture of the moon that they called supermoon, and they dated it, and the date was something like April 10th, 2009. I looked at the photo, and because I'm so familiar with all the photos, I recognized that photo as the Lick Observatory photo taken in 1946. And I put a post on my Facebook page, and within about 8 hours, Yerkes took their entire website down, took all the photos of the moon off, and filled it with interior photos of the observatory. And what I had done is caught them red-handed, faking moon photos. The same thing happened with National Geographic about a month later. They were using that same Lick Observatory 1946 photo, and I don't know why, but anyway, they were trying to fool us, and they didn't get away with it. But when I found the vapor coming up, I called Richard Hoagland. I told him what I saw, and he said, well, email me a drawing of what you think you see. And so I FedExed him a drawing, never heard from him. But I started continuing my research, and everything I saw pointed towards somebody's up there. Now, I read the original books by I forget who it was, that somebody else that's on the moon, and seen all those pictures, but they really weren't that clear. There's obviously something, but not that clear. And then I came across some photos, and Ron Schmidt, who is my partner in thelivingmoon.com on the web, and done fantastic work over the past 10 or 15 years, he and I decided to get somebody to take a photo of the moon for just us. And we found a guy in the UK, I forget what his name is. He had a 10-inch telescope, and he took 192 separate photos of the moon and put them together digitally and gave us a kick-ass photo of the moon. And the greatest part was the crater Aristarchus, which is, if you're looking at the moon, it's 10 o'clock towards the edge and several hundred miles northwest of Copernicus. And what we saw, and I'll show you the picture here, is an obvious construction of something. It's hexagonal in shape, and it has 6 support huge beams, and it glows bright blue. At this time that we put that together, Ron and I went to a UFO conference in San Jose. San Jose is near Lawrence Livermore, which was one of the very secret research places, along with Los Alamos National Laboratories. And Lawrence Livermore is where Dr. Teller hangs out. One of their scientists came to this UFO conference, and he was looking at our picture of Aristarchus, and he said, "Do you know what that blue is?" And we said, "No." He says, "That's the Cherenkov effect. What that is radiation coming in contact with air." He said, "When radiation comes in contact with air, it turns blue." So he gave us the lead on what we were looking at. And, you know, ever since then, we've thought that Aristarchus is a 23-mile in diameter generator, maybe generating all the power needed on the moon. Now, the moon was constructed on Jupiter about 40 million years ago, and has been towed around to the different planets in our solar system. Now, NASA tells us there's 9 planets in our solar system. In fact, there's 40 planets, and each of these planets has several moons. And each of these planets, along with several moons, has several different civilizations. So there is so much going on in this solar system. When they talk about searching for life in space, it's right in our solar system. There's so many people around here. Yes, humans and what we call ETs. Actually, we're ETs because none of us are from Earth. But we took that information and started getting more interesting pictures of the moon. One is Endymion, which is to the north and east of Plato, and there's an obvious like radio telescope array on the southeast corner of Endymion. And in a couple of the NASA photographs, it's airbrushed out. But on a couple you can, and particularly on the photo we got, clearly something is there.
And that photo is on the wall just over there?
Yes.
Okay, well, I'll remember to
Yeah, I'll show you Aristarchus, Endymion. And then the other thing we saw, which I'll show you, is on the Sinus Mare Crisium, which is a huge sea on the far northeast part of the moon, perfectly round, and it has lots of different constructs around the side. And to the north, on the north shore, there is what is obviously some kind of antenna about 3 to 4 miles high, shaped exactly like a champagne glass. You just look at it and say, yeah, that's a champagne glass. Well, obviously it's not a champagne glass, but it's an antenna shaped like the thing. The other area that interested us was Dam Wazzeau. Dam Wazzeau is a crater several hundred miles to the east of Grimaldi on the far eastern or far western side of the moon. And the photos that Lunar Orbiter took and other photos show a city as big as Los Angeles, but with obvious buildings and roads, and we joke to say there's obviously a McDonald's Golden Arches there. It's so obvious that there is a city there. And we've used that to photo, and there's one in the hallway there that you'll be able to take and see how obvious it looks. There's several others. One of the things that we did when the UFO conference came up is there's a guy named Norman Berggren who was for his entire career, 45 years, a scientist with many different corporations, Lockheed, Douglas, all those corporations. He had the highest of clearances. When he retired in 1986, he was interested in the rings of Saturn, and he asked NASA for their best Voyager photographs. And he took these photographs, enlarged them, and found 3 spaceships not spaceships, but obvious construction ships in the rings of Saturn. And the biggest one was 2,400 miles in length and 1,200 miles in diameter. We're talking a fairly large spaceship. And he felt those spaceships were involved in making the rings, and he wrote a book called Ring Makers of Saturn by Norman Berggren, which in those days cost $35. It's on the website now for $3,500 a piece. So fortunately I have 2 copies. One's autographed by Norman. Anyway, on our way to San Jose, I stopped to see and chat with Norman. Very nice guy. We formed a friendship that we've had until he passed away a couple years ago. And I used to drop by all the time and talk to him. One of the times I talked to him was after 9/11. And I mentioned the fact that I thought that the airplanes that crashed into the building were holograms. He said, John, I think you're right, and I'll tell you why. He says, one day I was on my way to work. He lives in Los Altos Hills, which is between San Francisco and Sunnyvale. Going down the freeway to Sunnyvale, early in the morning, like 7:30, 8 o'clock, he said, I looked up to my right, and here, 200 feet above the freeway, is a Boeing 747 just going along about the same speed as my car. And I looked up, and it was obviously an airplane. It just, it couldn't have been some kind of weird projection. It looked like an airplane flying along, and he said I watched it for about 30 seconds, and it just disappeared like that. So he said that was my introduction to holograms, and that's where I think our technology in holograms has advanced to, where we can project objects that look like the real thing. And that's why I think that you're correct that the Boeing 767 United Airlines that did the South Tower was a hologram. And then, of course, we have the CNN photos that have the airplane going into the building like it was butter, when in fact, if an airplane that big hit the building, it would come instantly apart. An airplane is made in 3 sections: the forward cockpit section, the center section, and the tail section. If an airplane had hit the building which is made of concrete and steel, it would have immediately knocked the tail section off, and it would have gone up against the building and crashed down to the sidewalk. But in fact, there was no debris of any kind on the sidewalk below the South Tower. So all this points to just a hologram hitting buildings 1 and 2. The reason the 9/11 was so successful, and we haven't been able to uncover any of the perps since then, is because they used 2 very advanced technologies that the public knows nothing about, and it served the purpose of convincing the public that it was just Muslims in airplanes crashing in. The hologram was one, and direct energy weapons is the other. Now, fortunately, Judy Woods wrote a book called Where Did the Towers Go? And it's a fantastic book, 600 pages, 4-color, hundreds of photographs, and her hypothesis is that was direct energy weapons. She doesn't necessarily believe that they came from space, but from contacts I have, I believe there's 13 orbiting direct energy weapons that's used for, number 1, destruction of the Murrah building in Oklahoma City, number 2, the World Trade Center 1 and 2 and 7, and the Northern and Southern California fires, which we believe were started in accordance with the Agenda 21 and what they want to clear out that area. But the public doesn't believe that. They don't believe, number 1, that there's direct energy weapons, or that holograms, that those airplanes were holograms. They just cannot believe it.
Well, the people that were in those planes, what happened to the people that had boarded those planes, and obviously the loved ones right now who would say that their loved ones were on that plane and they've lost them?
We don't know what happened to the people that were in the airplanes. In fact, if there were any people. Now, just in the case of Malaysian MS-370 and MS-17, MS-17 never existed. It was an airplane that they faked the flight from Amsterdam to Kuala Lumpur so that they could intercept that route with MS-370. And I'll tell you that story in a minute. But they hire crisis actors that pretend that they have loved ones, and they stand around and cry about,
But what if those loved ones could be traced back? What if what if I could go to Malaysia now and find family members who have always been at that house, have got all the photographs of their loved ones, and will tell me the story of the people that from the mums and dad's perspective as well. They had that daughter, they had that son.
Yeah. I don't have an answer for that, but I can tell you that MS-370 was specific, the disappearance was specifically to take over the patent that was owned by the 5 Chinese engineers on MS-70 and Jacob Rothschild. The airplane refueled in Diego Garcia, was flown to Tel Aviv. The passengers were probably raised the cabin altitude until they were all dead. They landed in Tel Aviv, and they had the Boeing interruptible autopilot in that Boeing 777, as they have had in the 757, 767, and all airplanes Boeing has produced since 1985. Now, the interruptible autopilot is strictly a piece of electronic equipment that can be controlled from the ground. They can take over the airplane in case it's hijacked, take control away from the pilot, and take that airplane and fly it anywhere they want and land it anywhere they want. The advantage here in MS-370 is the Israelis got it to Tel Aviv and added to the interruptible autopilot a control that they could control the airplane from a fighter alongside the MS-370. So what they did 3 weeks after MS-370 disappeared, what they were trying to do was eliminate these 5 engineers, which were already dead from cabin pressurization, took off the airplane from Tel Aviv, flew it north to intercept exactly the time and route of the fictional MS-17. Flew it on MS-17's route until they got to Ukraine, turned slightly left, flew into the Zionist-controlled area of Ukraine, and then the fighters shot down MS-370, which was pretending to be MS-17. The first doctors to the crash site said, these people have been dead for 3 weeks. These people weren't killed in this crash. Several months later, almost a year later, Jacob Rothschild gets killed in a helicopter that my friend Mike Green was flying, hit by a Cessna 150. We think this is the Wright Dragon Society that did that, but we can't prove that. But what happened is, with the 5 engineers and Jacob Rothschild out of the picture, the entire control of this secret patent went to the Carlyle Group. And that's where they wanted it in the first place, and that was what the whole MS-370 was about.
And what was this secret patent? Who were these 5 engineers?
Pardon?
What was this secret that the 5 engineers were keeping? Was it a
We
secret
don't
patent?
know what the patent was.
Right.
At least I don't know for sure. There's people that think it had to do with the inoperable autopilot, Boeing inoperable autopilot. They think it has something to do with that. I don't. I think it's something else. But whatever it was, the Carlyle Group owns it lock, stock, and barrel now. So back to...
and where did that research come from? What people have you spoken to get that information?
That would be Stone, S-T-O-N-E, I forget his first name, but he's the one that did the original research on that and had the photos at the crash site in the Zionist-controlled portion of Ukraine that absolutely, positively identified that airplane as 370, not MS-17.
Okay, so that's based on his research as well, right? Okay,
Right.
yeah, okay. And just going back to, well, let's go back to 9/11 as well, because there was so much you touched upon there. I've always found it difficult to think that there are directed energy weapons in that in that terrorist attack, and you know, most Americans that were in New York on that day will probably say, well, they never witnessed, you know, with their eyes, they never saw any directed energy weapon. It was just that, you know, the buildings came down,
Yeah.
and you know, there wasn't like a red ray
They're
or
saying
green
it was
ray.
a nuke in the basement. But if there was a nuke in the basement, it wouldn't have disintegrated from the top down. It would have disintegrated from the bottom up.
Right. But with a directed energy weapon of that scale to take down the Twin Towers, surely would you have not have seen something hitting it, or would it have been invisible to the human eye?
Yeah, you can't see a beam like that. Now, the direct energy weapons have been photographed by John Walson. I have pictures on my hallway that you can take pictures of them. I think there's 13 of them. You can look up John Walson secret space weapons and see those direct energy weapons yourself. Now, the way that they came about was it starts back at the end of World War II, when Germany knew they were going to lose. Germany was trying to build their atomic bomb, their own atomic bomb. The U.S. was trying to build their atomic bomb. Now, the difference between the two efforts was the U.S. could build the trigger and the insides of it. The only thing they couldn't produce was the plutonium needed for the explosion. Germany couldn't build the trigger or anything else. They could only produce the plutonium. So just a couple of weeks before, or actually a couple of months before the end of the war, Germany knew they were going to lose. They came over to the United States and they said, look, We know you're trying to build a bomb. We'll give you the plutonium you need to finish your bomb and bomb Japan. And all we ask is that at the end of the war, a couple of years later, you let 5,000 of our Nazi SS troops in, or not soldiers in. Give them American citizenship, no questions asked. We agreed to that, and that became Operation Paperclip, run by John Foster Dulles, who was Secretary of State, Allen Dulles, his brother, who was head of the CIA, and Eleanor Dulles, their sister, who was head of the Berlin desk. As soon as the 5,000 Nazis got in, they started taking over all the companies. First is they took over NACA, NACA, made it NASA, National Air and Space Administration, and for, it's always been controlled by the SS people, except for the administrator. He's always been American, but he doesn't know what's going on in the inside. So, what happened in 1961 when President Kennedy said we're going to go to the moon by the end of the decade, they knew for a fact that they couldn't do that. But they thought, what a great way to make money. We'll fake Mercury, we'll fake Gemini, we'll fake Apollo, and we'll get $40 billion to spend the way we want, which is what they did. And that's how the U.S. Navy space program started. So when President Trump a couple of months ago said he's going to have a space program, there's already a space program, and it's been in operation for 40 years. And they've got orbiting factories, they've got orbiting direct energy weapons. There's between 1,000 and 1,500 astronauts who are current and qualified who are in space right now. And the public is told with the end of the shuttle program, we have to beg the Russians to get a ride to the International Space Station. Pure BS. We launch 3 rockets a week out of Kwajalein, which is where the base is for the U.S. Navy space program. Kwajalein is in the South Pacific, and it's a chain of islands, and they launch rockets 3 times a week. There's a huge runway there called the Ronald Reagan Ballistic Missile Test Area, and I had a chance to fly there once with a cargo airline. I didn't see anything, but I could say I was there. The other place I went that I never thought I'd get to go to is Johnston Island. Now, Johnston Island is between Hawaii and Wake Island. Has always been super secret. You're not allowed to go anywhere near there. You're not allowed to talk to them. It's always been very, very, very secret. And we think it has to do with the destruction of weapons used for toxic gas. Anyway, in the middle 90s, the C-141, the Air Force C-141 was grounded. The C-41 is what used to run the Coral Sea runs. The Coral Sea runs was supplying food and equipment to Midway Island, Johnston Island, and then come back. Since the C-141 was grounded, they had nothing to do that, so they hired the company that I worked for, and I flew a DC-8, to do the Coral Run. And of course, I'd been to Midway many times, and when I was flying for the CIA and delivering airplanes to Vietnam, but I never had a chance to go to Johnston, and this gave me a chance to go. And on final at Johnston, I took a couple of pictures. We landed, and I taxied up to operations, and as we came to a halt, 6x6 with a mounted M60 pulled up in front of our airplane, and he had a machine gun and he pointed towards the cockpit. So the sergeant comes running up the stairs and he says, "Welcome to Johnston Island. You guys are free to file your flight plan over there, and we'll have you out of here in 2 hours. The only thing you don't want to do is go behind this airplane or look behind this airplane, or that guy will shoot you." So we got a couple of pictures, and it was nice to go there. We didn't see much. I've kept a watch on Johnston Island. and supposedly it's been completely dismantled. But I believe that both Wake Island and Johnson are being used for launches for the secret space program. Now, recently, the U.S. has rolled out the Block II Virginia-class submarines, highly advanced, and they've showed the public the USS Colorado, which is Block II, and they've said that it has very advanced technology, but they didn't bother to tell the public what the technology was. But I'll tell you what the technology was. There's 3 parts to it. Number 1 is the hull plate, which is normally steel, is a plate called D.D. D.D is manufactured in one of the factories in space run by the U.S. space program. It has to be made in zero gravity. And the components of it are that it's lighter than titanium and stronger than steel, and with a small electrical charge can keep the ocean between 5 and 7 centimeters away from the hull. What this does is eliminates the drag of a boat, an aircraft carrier, or a submarine, and we're no longer limited by the formula of a hull-based craft in water, which is 1.34 times the square root of the water line, which essentially limits all craft to about 45 knots. Whereas with this D.D now used as a hull material with no drag, the aircraft carriers such as the Gerald Ford, which has just been launched, which is the largest aircraft carrier, could go 100 knots, even faster. And the same thing with the submarine. It can go 100 knots. So this is one of the things they use. The other thing they used is fission reactors. Now, we've used fusion reactors for years, and we're told that fission won't, and I may have those mixed up, but whichever one it is, they've told us that that technology won't be available for another decade or so, when in fact we've been using it for about 10 years. And these reactors now in the submarines and aircraft carriers, they're not only lighter, but they give more power. So I may have mixed that up when I say we're probably using fission, and fusion is what we've developed. The other technology we've used is, instead of propellers on submarines, we're using what they call jet pump propulsion. And it's propulsion they use in the submarine that's more efficient, and it's much quieter. There's a picture, if you go to the web and type in USS Colorado, there's pictures of the construction of Colorado that shows the jet pump propulsion on the back of these new Block II submarines. So those are the 3 things they use on the new Block II Virginia-class submarines.
Wow, that's an incredible amount of information there as well, John. Thank you for sharing that, by the way. So, just going back as well to even the moon, when we first started speaking about the moon and the holographic technology. So, whose technology is that?
Well, the people live on the moon. There's, my estimate used to be 500 million, but in fact, based on Bruce Schwartz's new videos, I believe the human population on the moon is 2 billion. Now, none of those humans are from Earth. They're from somewhere else. I don't know where else. But those 2 billion people live up there, and they trade with the other 39 planets in our solar system and they have technology far in advance to what we've
But
got.
then what side of the moon is that on? Because if you was an astronomer or an amateur astronomer, you would probably not see that with the telescope, because you're saying that there is a hologram up there.
Yeah.
Yeah. But you're saying that we've got pictures over there that show the hologram switched off, or...
No, they're able to penetrate it. And
Yeah.
he does it somehow with light, and I'm not sure how he does it.
Right.
But those pictures on the wall there, you can take a look at the top of that poster and see some photos of these massive industrialized areas up there.
And of course, when the astronauts from the Apollo missions have come back, and there's, they've reported what they've reported, which is obviously it's quite barren. You would say that's a cover-up?
No astronaut ever went to the moon. No astronaut ever went more than 500 miles, 400 miles into space. And the reason is because there's a Van Allen belt, which is highly radioactive, that extends from 500 miles to 25,000 miles out in space. The reason ET put that Van Allen belt is there so we couldn't visit any place, because they don't want us contaminating the solar system or the moon or anything else until we complete our essential job here on Earth, which is to live with integrity, without envy, hate, or greed, and to express our love to our families. So they don't want us out there, and that's why they put the Van Allen belt.
Not even if you could go through that Van Allen belt very quickly. I mean, it's a very brief...
You would need 5 feet of lead to defeat the purpose of the radioactivity, and that's why they put it there, so that we could not get beyond. So all of the stories you hear about the moon are fake. Stanley Kubrick, who made the year 2001, is one of the great producers of science fiction films. He was asked by President Nixon in 1968, taken to the White House, said, "We've got a problem, we can't get to the moon, but we have to have the public think we did. So we want you to make the films of the astronauts on the moon." He agreed to do that. The films were made in London, or somewhere in the UK. And when he was done, he went home and stayed most of his life in his house, because he knew that, or had heard that every single person that was part of the moon secret was killed. And he didn't want to die until it was his time. Now, he made two films after that, Eyes Wide Shut and The Shining. And both of those films have secret things in them that he's trying to tell the public, hey, we didn't go. And there's all kinds of little the number of the door, the kids wearing a rocket Saturn V t-shirt, just all kinds of little things like that throughout both Eyes Wide Shut and The Shining.
But obviously, I mean, I can't do this. If I could get access to Buzz Aldrin, which I'd have to be part of the mainstream media to do that, probably, right? But if I could, and he would say that no, he went to the moon, he was there. I mean, that's his story.
Yes, they've advanced mind control to the part where it's absolutely perfect. For instance, in 1989, when Bob and I got caught up at the test site, the next day his boss, Dennis Mariana, took him to what was then called, it was something like Desert Springs Air Force Base, now Creech Air Force Base, which is the head of all security for the test site. They got him out of the car with a gun in his ear, and they took him in this office, and they said, "Now, Bob, when we gave you this clearance, it didn't mean you were to take all your friends up to the test site and show them the flying saucers." So they said, "Do you want to work here or not?" And Bob didn't answer. because the last 2 flights he made up to Groom Lake, he could remember going up the steps to the 737 in the morning, and he could remember coming down the steps that evening, but he couldn't remember anything that he did during that day. Now, we've had that technology for 20, 30 years, but the problem has been that, the scientists and engineers have had a nagging feeling. I did something today, but I can't remember what it was. Now, that doesn't occur anymore. They're completely satisfied with not remembering. They don't even remember it. So when you talk about the astronauts absolutely being convinced, and I talked with them. One came to interview Bob Lazar, and he absolutely said, yeah, I was on the moon. And I've had other people talk to him personally. He just passed away. I can't remember what his name was, Brian somebody. Said, John Lear says you were never on the moon. He said, well, too bad for John, because I was there. I remember it. And that's how good the mind control has come. And they needed that mind control to be sure that the astronauts could never say, no, you know what, we faked it.
How do you know that you're not mind controlled? How would you know that?
Could be. You know, Ron Schmidt is an amazing guy, and
Yes,
we've always thought on the same wavelength. And when the shuttle program was going, our question is, why is it
going?
Why is it that it takes us 2.5 days to get to the International Space Station when it only takes the Russians 37 minutes? Okay, so Jim Oberg, who was the NASA frontman who lied for NASA, he came up with all kinds of, he said, you guys don't know very much about orbital mechanics, do you? And then we had the same question is, always when they'd come back to Earth, it would always take 2.5 days, and it only took the Russians 37 minutes to come back. And Jim Oberg's response to that is, says, well, you know, they've been working 10 days straight on the unloading in the International Space Station, and they're tired, and we got to give them crew rest. And so they're getting their crew rest in the shuttle. So what happened is Ron somehow came across with the manifest for the Vostok. Now, when we launched the shuttle, one day later they would always launch the Vostok. So our question was why? And he got a hold of a manifest, and all it was food, far more than would ever be needed by the International Space Station. So what we found out, what we finally came up with, was that the shuttle, when it launched, it was going all to the various U.S. Navy Space Program projects that were in orbit and giving them food, fruit, and supplies and equipment. That's what took them so long to get there. And the way we figured it out is one day Ron showed me a picture of when the shuttle got to the International Space Station. They opened the hatch and it's only half full. Where did the rest of the stuff go? And so then we figured out that the Vostok, what they were doing was, after we unloaded anything that was needed at the space station, they loaded it up with all the stuff that they had just brought up. And when the shuttle launched from the International Space Station, they went back down to all the different projects, all the different orbiting factories, giving them food and equipment and supplies. And the only reason they stopped that is because now they had developed Quadrant Island as a perfect place to launch from. Nobody could see it. Nobody had any information coming out there. And only by sheer accident that the STS-88 accidentally saw one of the highest classified space planes in existence. And because of compartmentalization, they took a picture of it. And when they got on the ground, they started passing the picture around. But because of compartmentalization, nobody could tell them that it was secret. So this picture went around, and I've got a bunch of them on the wall here. And what it was one of these space planes that fits in the nose cone of the rockets that go up from Kwajalein. When it gets up there, it opens, space plane comes out, goes to all the different projects they got, loading, taking equipment, dropping off equipment, and then it can glide back down to Earth on its own and land at Kwajalein or Vandenberg or Edwards Air Force Base or wherever. And the STS crew accidentally got a picture of that. So when the picture came out, they had a real problem. What do we say this thing is? So first they started calling it a UFO, and then they figured that wasn't going to fly. And then they remembered that back in the 50s, the U.S., before they started launching satellites, determined that there was a satellite orbiting Earth, and they called it the Black Knight. And it's always been up there, and it's still up there. And so they called this space plane the Black Knight. And it's kind of disappeared since. I mean, the story has disappeared. Nobody talks about it. Public's retention of information doesn't last more than a day, so.
But then, obviously, you know, if I was to sit down next to some scientists, various different scientists in various different fields, right, they would say that, you know, no such things exist. That from their knowledge, nothing of this exists. It's all, you know, this is. Well, if I was to sit down with some scientists, right, whatever field they might be from, they would say that there's only, you know, there's the known planets in our system, yeah. There is only the International Space Station. We only have the technology that we have. We haven't got anything past that right now, because as a scientist, you know, they're working with what they've got. Would that go down? Well, would that go along, should I say, with what you're saying about compartmentalization?
Yeah, that's exactly what they're supposed to believe. And even if they suspected there was something else, they're not going to jeopardize their paycheck by saying, "Oh, by the way, I heard this," you know, and he might be true.
But then if I was with, like I said before, maybe an amateur astronomer, or, you know, at some sort of astronomy place, wherever that may be, right? And you know, they're pointing the telescope in the night sky and, you know, observing, you know, Mars or, you know, Neptune or Jupiter or whatever it may be. They're not seeing anything more than the planetary systems that are there with their telescope. So how can they be there if they're not observing them?
Because for the other 30 planets, they're hidden with gigantic mirrors, which are placed so that when we look up at it, we're just seeing space. We're not seeing the planet.
And who's put those mirrors there, would you say?
E.T.
Multiple races?
Yeah, at least multiple races.
Going back to 9/11 as well, you know, again, if I was to meet some of the family victims from the Twin Towers, I mean, they're not going to sit comfortably with a directed energy weapon that destroyed the towers. I mean, that's not in their remit. That's not in their understanding. I mean, it's barely in my understanding, do you know what I mean, as I sit here with you. You're never going to convince those people. I mean, if they watch this, they'll say, well, that's just not true.
Yeah, and we can accept that, because the whole point of the exercise was people didn't think it was true. They don't want people suspecting that there's direct energy weapons. They don't want people suspecting that there's holograms. They spent a lot of money keeping that secret, and they're not going to say anything about it. Now, in the case of Flight 93, that crashed in Shanksville, Nobody remembers, I remember, that airplane landed in Cleveland Hopkins. And there was video of those passengers getting off and going into the NASA hangar there. And then it took off. It obviously didn't go to Shanksville, but they said it did go to Shanksville and crashed and disappeared in the ground, which is impossible. But the thing that the perps didn't know is the electronic equipment in all aircraft called ACARs, the aircraft communicating and receiving equipment, which is located in the equipment bay under the cockpit, which the pilots have no circuit breakers for, and which records vital information, position, altitude, speed, engine temperature, engine EGT, engine RPM, transfers it to the satellite, and then goes to the various the airplane manufacturers, Boeing or Rolls-Royce or Pratt & Whitney or GE. And through the Freedom of Information Act, we got the 8-hour readout after Shanksville, and it was going on for 4 hours after the plane crashed.
Where is that information now?
I don't know.
Fair enough.
But that was enough time to get back to Groom Lake, which is where I think all the flights originated. But, you know, people think Groom Lake is a one-time deal. There's 20 years ago, when I was really into the secrecy stuff, there was 32 AAOs, which are called Air Access Only bases. So there's plenty more than Groom Lake.
What would they have done with the passengers on that plane that crashed at
First of all, we don't
Shanksville?
know there was any passengers. Second of all,
well, people have lost loved ones, so haven't they? I mean,
well, these are crisis actors. Now, if they're not crisis actors, I don't know what they did with their loved ones. They're probably dead.
And that video that you just mentioned there as well, again, that won't be available, but that was out there at some point.
Pardon? Oh, yes, yeah, that would be available.
Would that be available? Okay, so that's maybe available online somewhere.
Yeah, unless they've gotten rid of it, which they would have had to in order for the Shanksville crash to fly. Now, what happened was they had the World Trade Center 1 and 2, the planes hit it. Then they were going to have Flight 93, the that Shanksville airplane, crash into Building 7. But something went wrong. It was either projector or something went wrong that they couldn't fake the crash into Building 7. So they had to make a crash site. It was a hurry-up deal. They found a hole near Shanksville. They put a bunch of parts in there, had a bunch of people standing around in hazmat suits, and let the public in 6 hours later, 5 o'clock, and said this is where it crashed. And then they had to figure out, what do we do with Building 7? It's got to be destroyed. What do we do? Will the public not ask any questions if we just destroy it? Well, we don't have any chance. Okay, let's destroy it. And the public's gone for it. I mean, you don't see anybody clamming around what happened to Building 7. They just accepted it.
Well, it was strange how they reported it early before it was actually destroyed. Yeah. I mean, that is out there on the BBC.
In the UK,
clip.
They had it 20 minutes before.
Yeah. That is always a bit strange, but then, you know, perhaps you know, in that day of confusion, major confusion, they'd already thought that Building 7 was destroyed. But, you know, you know, I'm just putting the opposing opinion out there. That's all. In regards to the secret space program, we've had people like Corey Goode come forward. We've had people like Emery Smith come forward. Obviously, David Wilcox is covering that quite a bit. Do you think what they're talking about and their ideas on what the secret space program is fits into what you've discovered?
I have no idea what they think it is. I never listened to their stuff. Maybe if you could brief me,
Well, you know, Corey Goode is talking about a 20 and back program where he spent Well, actually, I believe it's a 60 and back. He spent 20 years, then another 20 years, and another 20 years, and he's brought them back in time to when he was at the age when he would have left to have gone on such a mission.
That's bullshit. Those guys, they come up with fantastic ideas. My stuff is based on stuff you can go and check out.
Yeah. Okay. But why would they tell such a story then?
Who?
Why would Corey, for example, tell such a story?
Money. They need money. Fame. The same thing with Wilcox. Is that his name?
David Wilcock, yeah.
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 I think he's the guy, but when it's what I call UFO disease. Once you experience people, the enthralling feeling you get with people listening to everything you have to say, when you run out of stuff, you start making it up because you want that stuff to keep going on.
Where, if you look at your research, then what makes your research different, would you say? Is your research different because of the people that you've spoke to over the many years and got their testimonies? What makes the people's testimonies that you've got any different compared to
I only
them?
wait until I've got stuff ironclad. For instance, D.D. I had a friend who knew about it, who drew me a picture of it. The fusion engine, I've been following the progress of that, and I know from various people, particularly everything that we get, we have to give to the UK. And the UK doesn't have, they have pretty strict secrecy, but not as strict as we do. And some of them have told their mothers or friends about the stuff that we have on the hull and the fusion engines. Not in so many words, but enough that we could know, yeah, John's right. Miles Johnson, many years ago, sent me that picture up there. Let me see if I can point it out here. This one. He was on a tower right as the sun set, and he looked up, and here's that vehicle. And it took 7 seconds to get from overhead to the horizon. Having been familiar with airplanes all his life, he knew that it was at least 10 times the size of a 747. And it was headed towards Machrihanish, where we know there's a secret base. But it took me, 10, 15 years to figure out what it was doing, why it was there. And it's the craft that's bringing down the steel plates for the submarines and the aircraft carriers. It had to be something that big.
But then I could look at a story that Kerry Cassidy covers, like Mark Richards. Now, Mark Richards is a guy that's in jail, and
I've never believed Mark Richards' story so convinced me.
Well, I've just spent 2 weeks in San Rafael collecting the information on him, and I'm making a little documentary on it to show that Mark Richards is not a secret space program whistleblower. He was part of a murder that took place on July 6, 1982, and he's saying that he was framed for that murder by the deep state. But when I spoke to the lead detectives that arrested him in 1982 and charged him, that's not true. And then when I spoke to his
excellent, Kevin, excellent work.
And when I spoke to his crime partner that had committed the murder for him, he told me that Mark Richards was stood 1 foot away from him as he committed the murder, so he was on the planet when the murder took place. And I've got all the court transcripts as well of what was said in the courts.
You are amazing. Thank you very much for your work.
And it's a full story. And I'm not against Kerry. I mean, if she wants to cover that story, she believes it's true, that's fair enough, right? But you have to do your research, and I spent 2 weeks in San Rafael doing the research, knocking on doors, and even interviewing Mark Richards' ex-wife, Crossing Hoover's partner, and I just got in contact with the murder victim's sister, Richard Baldwin's sister, called Susan Baldwin, and she was there at the time of the court hearings for both Crossing and Mark Richards, and none of it's true. Mark Richards was a fantasy writer back in the day, and he is now.
Thank you for your work, Kevin. You're really an amazing guy.
Well, you know, why did I do it? Well, it was just to try to give us some context in the stories that are out there. Now, there's Mark Richards is one story. There are so many other stories. How much disinformation do you think there is in the field?
I've always said, you mean of all the information could be? Ron and I had a friend come to visit us before he was going into deep intelligence work. He said, I won't be able to contact you, so this is your last chance. And I said, I think that of all the information there is, the public knows 1%. I think I know 1.5%. He said, that's about right.
So let me ask you this. Would you be willing to say that your information, that some of it could be, you're doing your best to try to get it right, but there could be inaccuracy in some of your research as well?
Absolutely, positively, yes.
Well, I really appreciate you saying that as well. I really appreciate you saying that. Thank you.
How could you say anything else?
I don't think anyone's ever asked you that. But when Kerry comes to see you this week, I'm not against Kerry. This is not, you know, yes, we've got a disagreement right now, but you know, she's free to do what she wants, and we're all at different stages. And what if I was wrong about Mark Richards? What if I was? But I've just gone with the evidence. That's it.
No.
That's it. So, would you say that you're a whistleblower?
Yes. The last 69 months, I've been posting secrets on Facebook that I know. But the clearance that I had expired many years ago. I had a Q clearance. I can give you the number. You can check it out. But, you know, I didn't learn anything when I had that clearance, what I'm talking about now. Now is just stuff that I know from friends that work there. Now, I've lived in Las Vegas since 1973, and I've met a lot of people. And, you know, the guy that flew with me over in Laos ended up chief pilot for special projects. The girl that was flew with me at Nevada Airlines ended up chief flight attendant for special projects. Now, I never got any information from either one of them, but that's how deep my contacts go.
Yeah, absolutely. And did you work for the CIA ever?
Yeah.
Yeah. And have you talked about that as much as you can? Is there things that you've left out?
No. I'm told that I worked for the CIA for 2 years before I knew I was working for them. It was just some guy said, do you know who we work for? And I said, World Aviation. And he said, but I mean really work for. And then he started to explain it. And, you know, I never had a file. I forget what they call the file of the CIA. I just did, you know, contract work. You know, get Lear, he'll be good for this, you know. And that's how I ended up in Mogadishu in 1977. And I got a call. I was in Las Vegas, and I think I was flying for Nevada Airlines then. And the guy says, thick German accent. I understand you're rated in the 707. I need a pilot to do some work over here in Europe, pay $100 an hour. Would you be able to do it? Yeah. So he said, we'll go to Frankfurt and check into the International Hotel there at the airport, and I'll contact you there. So we talked a little bit about how am I going to get paid for the ticket. He said, I'll give you cash. So got on the airplane, went to Frankfurt, checked in, and there was a note on my phone, we'll talk to you later. And that evening I got a message, or I think I forget how I got the message. Go to Lufthansa counter at 10 o'clock. There'll be a ticket there waiting for you to go to Budapest. And I'll call you, or I'll meet you in Budapest. So I'm getting my ticket, and here come 8 other guys that I knew from the flying I'd done in Cairo. And I said, what are you guys doing here? And they said, well, you don't think you're getting in on a deal like this without us, do you? So we all go to Budapest, and there's obviously a CIA guy or somebody standing at customs that got us through. Go to the Hilton, I think it was, and check in, get a call at 8 o'clock, go to room such and such. So we all go up there, and there's a bunch of chairs around, and there's 9 of us, and let's see, 3 times, yeah, 9. And this guy comes in, introduces himself as Hank Wharton, and starts giving us a travel log on Budapest. He said, actually, Budapest is 2 towns, Buda on the north of the Danube, and Pest on the south, connected with a chain bridge. It's October, and it's starting to cool off now, but not too cold at night. And as he's telling us this, he's got a piece of paper like this, and he hands it to one guy and says, and so he reads it, and just carrying on the dialogue. And as soon as that guy finishes it, he takes it and points it to another guy, and we all read it. And then when we're done, as a matter of fact, I have that piece of paper. And he said, we're going to go for a walk out on the chain bridge, and we're going to go get dinner. So we go out, and the chain bridge was just across from the hotel. And we get out in the middle, and there's nobody there except us. And he says, okay, here's what we're doing. We're taking supplies to Mogadishu. You'll refuel in Jeddah. Don't talk to anybody. Don't say anything. When they unload all the stuff in Mogadishu, just turn around and come back. And so went to have dinner, and got up at 3 o'clock in the morning, had breakfast, and go out to the airport. And it's 00. I mean, it is foggy beyond all belief. And the airplanes are all there, powered up, and there's military guys all standing around with rifles at port arms. And we get in. I take the first airplane because I didn't want to be slowed down by any of the other guys, and start up and go out to the runway. And we're not limited by FAA because we're not flying U.S. registered airplanes. And so the tower is not there to limit your takeoff. They can't say you can't take off. All they can do is clear you for takeoff, which they did. And we took off, and everybody followed me. We go to Jeddah, refuel there. And then from Jeddah, we fly down the Red Sea. We were briefed you'll have no radio communications. You're going radio silence the whole way. They didn't explain exactly why, but the reason is because the MiGs stationed at Aden, which is East Bloc control, communist control, they knew this was going on and they didn't like it, and they were going to shoot down the airplane. But what had happened is a couple of weeks before they asked us to come over there, they had forced an airplane down. Now our planes were painted very similar to Somali airplanes, and they forced a Somali airplane, which they thought was us, down, and it was passengers, and they were very embarrassed. So they were going to be sure next time that they didn't make a mistake. And so we got down to Mogadishu, and as fate would have it, there's a thunderstorm right over the field, and I had minimum fuel, and I made an approach, which was the main approach of my life. It was what they call a 9270, because there was no instrument approach or anything, and it was 100 and quarter in heavy rain. Made it, landed, everybody else got in, the thunderstorm blew out, and they all landed in perfect conditions. They unload the airplane, we go to a hotel and get a couple hours sleep, come back, fly back through Jeddah, come back home, and this went on for a couple of weeks, and there was some problem that we had to stop, and that was that. But that was obviously a CIA operation.
What were you moving around, do you think? What were you
armed? And what it was Russia had traditionally supported Somalia, and they had built a deep water port on the north side of Somalia at the Gulf of Aden, and it was the only deep water port on the Red Sea. Now, at this time in 1977, the name of the game was real estate on the Red Sea. The reason was because if the Straits of Hormuz were ever closed, that would block all oil coming out of Saudi Arabia and Bahrain, and they had to have another way to get it out. So they built these huge pipelines that went all the way across Saudi Arabia to Yanbu on the Red Sea, and then the freighters would load up there and either go out the Suez Canal or the Gulf of Aden. But wherever it was going to go, we, U.S., needed real estate to park their ships and get refueled. And so Russia made the gigantic mistake of supporting the rebels at Ethiopia, just to the north, which is their lifelong Somali enemies. And the Somalis kicked the Russians out based on that. We went in and say, hey, we want to be your friends. What can we do? We need ammunition for our guns. Well, you know, the problem is East Bloc ammunition is 1 millimeter less than West Bloc. So we couldn't give them our stuff. We had to go and buy stuff. And, you know, in East Bloc it was pretty easy in those days if you knew who to go to. And that's why it ended up in Budapest, is because all that ammunition was East Bloc, which we bought and took down to arm Somalia.
Wow. God, my God, man. Well, one thing I wanted to ask you as well was about Vietnam, because, you know, you speak to most Vietnam war heroes or soldiers that fought in Vietnam. You know, they'll say the war was all about communists, right? But you know, obviously there's stories that have been covered now to say that the Vietnam War was for something else, was for some ET agenda.
It was what?
For some sort of ET agenda. We went there to fight off the ETs. Now, obviously, to me, having known some Vietnam people, they would, you know, just kind of say that that's just not true. They were there, you know, killing people savagely, right? What's your take on Vietnam?
Well, it was a put-off job. As you know, the Gulf of Tonkin incident was bullshit. It never happened. They wanted a war, and at that time, the Nazis had taken over Bell Helicopter, and they wanted to sell helicopters. And they sold a shit-pot load based on this war. So, you know, I believe that, and it's hard to believe this story, but we know that the Holocaust was bullshit. There weren't 6 million Jews killed. There may have been 800,000, but they were not gassed. They died along with Poles and all other factions that died during World War II. The Jews were not, but the reason they floated this 6 million Holocaust was because the Jews were going to ally with the Germans to take over the world. And as hard as this is to believe, you know that Hitler survived World War II, went to Antarctica, then went to South America, and he died in a hospital in the middle of the United States in 1968. And I think he pretty much ran things up until then. And there's so much Israeli influence in the U.S. government. They have literally taken us over. And in 1925, a guy was born to a wealthy Jewish family in the Philippines. His name was Ben Rich. And when he got of college age, they sent him to California, and he went to UCLA and University of California at Berkeley for his engineering degree. In 1953, they got him a job at Lockheed. In 1954, he was doing such a superior job, they wanted to funnel him into the Skunk Works. But the problem was, he was born in the Philippines, and you cannot, under any circumstances, get a high-level security clearance if you haven't been born in the United States. So they faked his background. And the reason they were able to do this is there's so many dual American Israelis working in high-level places, it was no problem. His new identity was Ben Dover, B-E-N and then Dover. And what that name was an inside joke against American intelligence, giving him a security clearance when he shouldn't have had it. He got the security clearance, continued to work for the Skunk Works, was very helpful in the Blackbird program. And when Kelly Johnson retired in 1975, he took over the Skunk Works. And he ran the Skunk Works until, I think, 1990, when he retired, and he died in 1995. When he took over the Skunk Works, he supervised the construction of an airplane called the F-19, and I have pictures of a model of it. And all of us that were interested in black airplanes originally thought the airplane was called the F-19. And a couple of years later, the Air Force says, no, that's the F-117A. We call it the F-117A. And everybody forgot about the F-19, but there was an F-19. They made 64 of them. I have a friend in town that worked on them, told me the whole story. And what they did is it was a bat-winged airplane, much more advanced than the 117A. And guess where they went? Israel. So it turns out that Ben Rich was the highest ranking Mossad spy west of the Mississippi, running the Skunk Works. He had access to everything. The reason I'm telling you this story is to show you how the Israelis have infiltrated our country and more or less taken over.
Obviously with Vietnam, there's those, you've talked about this before, where or you've agreed with it before, maybe should I say, where the whole Vietnam War was not for the reason it was for a different reason.
Yeah, that's possible. That there definitely was a Mothman type, and when I say Mothman type, it stood about 7 feet tall, had wings, but it didn't use the wings to fly. It could, without the wings flapping, it could go up and around. And Lou Baldwin is the one that told us about that and wrote about it, and said that he was stationed in Okinawa with a secret unit that was only sent over there when they would find one of these enclaves or aliens at some point, and they would go over there and try and find them and catch them.
But the actual main Vietnam War did happen, because if you speak to Vietnam vets, they were there.
Yeah, absolutely.
They were killing on a mass scale.
And what?
On a mass scale, they were slaughtering people.
Yeah, yeah. It was faked by the Gulf of Tonkin incident to sell helicopters. And yes, the reason was, the stated reason was, we didn't want Vietnam to fall. It would just be the domino theory that as soon as they fall, then Bangkok or Thailand would fall. Da 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 da.
So you don't, you don't go against that.
No.
Vietnam soldiers fought there in
no.
hand combat, right?
58,000 Americans died there.
Exactly, we can't deny that. But
No.
what you're saying was there was also some other activity that went on there as well,
Right.
that was kept hushed up, right?
Right.
Yeah, okay. What would you say your take is on Antarctica right now, when there's so many researchers saying that it's all in Antarctica? Now, if I ever went to Antarctica, which you can't just easily go there, right, because it's so inaccessible, would I really find anything there?
You wouldn't be allowed to get there, but there is a huge, huge civilization there. Now, why Buzz Aldrin called it evil, I don't know. But there is a huge civilization there, and Linda Howe interviewed the C-130 pilot that accidentally saw it. But just before we started talking about this, there was something else I wanted to continue on. What we were talking about just prior to
you were just saying about the flying saucers and aliens, that you don't see them anymore. They've taken them away.
Yeah. No, not they were all moved to Woomera. Now, the reason they moved to Woomera is they're sick of people going up to Highway 375 and watching them fly there. And they had nowhere else to go that couldn't be found out by people here. So they just moved it all to South Central Australia. And Woomera is the former nuclear test area. And there's plenty of underground facilities there they can hide this stuff in. Fortunately, I have some friends down there that send me drawings and information about what's going on. And he told me one night about 9 or 10 of them flying along, and the first set were triangles with a light on each side, and then there was another set that came along that was an elongated triangle. And he said, "John, it sounded like a prop airplane." And I said, "That's probably a fake, because they don't want people to look up. And if they hear a prop, they're not going to look up. So they've got a way to make it sound like it's a prop."
What do you think about something like the Phoenix Lights?
The what?
The Phoenix Lights.
Phoenix Lights was us. They had the missing man formation, so it was obviously specific for some kind of accident or something. But that was us. That wasn't easy. No.
Well, okay, because we've not got very long left, but you were saying about Antarctica, what you...
Oh, Antarctica. Yeah, it's huge, and I haven't got any inside information. The best stories Linda Howe has, and I've had people, 1 or 2 people go down there, transferred down there, and I said, whatever you do, don't try to give me information, because you will get caught.
Yeah. Okay.
So The only thing I want to know is Buzz Aldrin went down there and said he saw evil. Now, I don't know what that means.
Do you think he means by it nearly killed him, for example? It nearly finished him off? Just the it's so, it's not meant for humans, Antarctic. So do you think that's what he meant?
Could be. We were not supposed to be there. Now, how Admiral Byrd got away with it, I don't know.
Now, getting back to Bob Lazar, after all these years now, there's a new documentary coming out on the Bob Lazar. It comes out next year. Do you think there'll be any new information that comes out in that kind of documentary or movie?
There can't be, because there, as far as I know, Bob hasn't been back to work. Now, I have a friend who swore to me that he saw Bob up there a couple years ago. And I've asked Bob, he said, no way. And I say, well, couldn't they have give you mind control? He said, but everybody here has seen me here during the weekends. I'm here all the time. So I don't know what the real story is, but the bottom line on the Bob Lazar story was Mike McConnell, who was MJ1, wanted to get some of the information out on the saucers and ET. And they needed somebody who was had enough degrees and was smart enough they could legitimately hire. At the same time, they needed to be able to discredit the guy instantly if things went south. So since Bob ran a cat house up in Reno and did a couple other things, they were able to, if they needed to, discredit him instantly. They knew that Bob would instantly tell me the information, and they knew that I would, pass it on to the public, and that's what they wanted. They wanted to see the public reaction to stuff, but they also wanted to be able to deny it. So that's why they hired Bob. That's why he went up there, and it worked out just like they said. He came over and told me, and if it wasn't that scenario, why did they let him continue to talk to me every fucking time he went over there?
Well, obviously Stanton Freeman, if you speak to Stanton Freeman about Bob Lazar, Stanton's, says that, there's no evidence of his qualifications, his story doesn't check out completely.
Yeah, I told Stan if he could ever prove that Bob didn't go up there, I'd kiss his ass in the center of Flamingo and Maryland Parkway at high noon, But, both Stan Freeman and this other MoveOn guy, I'm trying to think of his name, they just couldn't stand for that story to be true. Absolutely could not stand it. So, and to this day, this one guy, MoveOn guy, still don't believe he believes it, because when George Knapp gave his lecture 2 years ago down in Phoenix, and said, I believe it's true, and here's why I believe it's true. In the auditorium, there was a group, at the far back, all by themselves, he said, I guess you're the guys that still don't believe the story. And they said, yeah, that's us.
and obviously there's the question as well of, like, in Lazar's story, did he ever see any aliens at S4?
Yeah, and the way it happened is in February of '89. He would come up here after being at S4, and he'd tell me what was going on. And he comes up one night, sits down in the chair there, and he's fidgety. And he keeps giving me the high sign. Now, we never talked in here anymore because we knew it was bugged and they heard everything. So he gave me the high sign, let's go out. So it was in the evening. It was bitter cold, and I just had short sleeves on. We walk out by the pool, and beyond the pool, there's a big wooden gate, and beyond that is the stables and the tennis court. We go there. Marilee is usually suspicious of us together at any time. Where are you guys going? So we go out there, close the gate, and I said, what? And he says, John, you'll never know what it's like to see your first alien. I said, you saw one? Yeah. It couldn't have been a doll. It couldn't have been. No, I saw it. How did it happen? He said, I was being led down this hallway, security on both sides of me. We went by this door that had a frame with the wires going through it, and through this door, I could see two lab technicians with their coats on, looking towards me, with a gray standing there with his back to me, conversing with them. And we talked maybe 5 or 10 minutes about it, and he convinced me that he didn't see one. Ever since then, he's denied it. He said Lear made that up. It was probably a monkey or something. He's come up with a story mainly because he doesn't want to be associated with having seen an alien. It's just not part of his deal. But he did, for sure.
Do you two talk much? Do you talk with him much still?
All the time. He saved my life 9 months ago. For the last 4 years, I had been taking methadone and oxycodone for my back problems and other physical problems I got. And last May, the DEA put out an edict that no longer could our primary doctors issue pain medication, that we would have to go to a pain management specialist, which I did on May 31st, Dr. Chibi's, and Marilee took me there. I gave him a urine sample. He asked me a couple of questions, gave me a prescription for the oxycodone and the methadone. We left. 2 days later, he calls Marilee and says, we can't treat your husband anymore. He's tested positive for methamphetamine. Well, the chances of me using methamphetamine are a trillion to one. First of all, I have not left this den in 8 years except to go to the doctor. Second of all, I was taking methadone and oxycodone. Why would I take methadone? Third of all, how would I get methadone? Fourth of all, how would I take it? I don't even know how you take methadone. So anyway, somebody had spiked it. And to make a long story short, when I went to George Knapp, my friend of 40 years, and told him this story, he said, John, this is going on nationwide. He said, I'm doing a 10-part series on opioids. He said, the reason they're doing this is they only do it with patients, Southwest Medical, you cost them probably over $500,000 with all the problems you've had. They can't afford it. So they want to get rid of you, and the only way they can do that is to spike your sample so that you can't get any medicine, hopefully so that when you go through detox, involuntary detox, you'll kill yourself. And that's what's happening nationwide. And he, did a story on that. So fortunately, 2 weeks into involuntary detox, I called Bob and I said, I'm not going to make it, Bob. I just don't feel like going on. He said, look, they've come up with this stuff called Kratom. He said, Gufon, Gene Huff, has some. Why don't you get him over? He said, let me call him. So Gene Huff came over with a bottle of Kratom. I tried it, and it changed my life. It helped me endure the detox, which, I haven't taken any opioids for a year now. And I take it right here. I take 2 teaspoonsful every 4 hours. And it helps me continue on. And so
So he saved your life in a sense.
Yeah, he
Yeah.
saved my life. And then about 2 months after that, I was so weak that I couldn't pick up my TV changer. I called him again. He said, go down to the grocery store and get this stuff called 5-HTP. He says it's for people that are detoxing for at least 60 days. Don't take it before 60 days, but take it after. It will help you get your energy back. And I'll be damned, 4 weeks later, it started to work, and I've taken it ever since. But those are 2 times he saved my life, and, we talk every once in a while. But
Bob's story will carry on in the new documentary to a new audience.
Yeah. And
I just hope it's as truthful as it can be to, what you went through with him and, the journey that he's been on as well.
Yeah.
Yeah. What do you think when you look back after all these years at the current state of ufology in a sense? How do you feel that it is right now?
It's kind of a joke, they're not getting, they won't get anywhere. They talk about disclosure, and I will tell you one thing, it will never happen, ever, ever, ever. The deal is with ET that they will not disclose anything that's going on. That's why I say if disclosure comes out, it'll be a fake story. It won't be the real story.
Do you believe something like Roswell? Do you think that something like Roswell did happen?
Absolutely, positively. Have you read all of Lou Baldwin's books?
No.
You have to buy at least 5 or 6 of them and read them, because it's important that you know that information that Lou is putting out.
Well, I've read Donald Schmidt's books. Donald Schmidt?
Yeah?
Yeah, I've read his books.
Is that the tall grays ones?
No, on Roswell. Donald Schmidt's book.
Oh, yeah, okay.
The day after Roswell. Yeah. Not the day after. Sorry. Donald Schmidt's books on Roswell. Yeah.
Read Lou Baldwin's book on Roswell, because Carrie emailed me yesterday and she wanted to know if I had Majestic, and I was the first guy to get Majestic. I have 2 copies up there, and that was pretty neat. But Lou Baldwin has the best.
And you'd say that Majestic was a real thing? Majestic 12 was a real
Absolutely.
thing?
And, when Bill Moore first came out with it and everybody was saying, oh, it's bullshit, I knew there was one guy that I could rely on whether Majestic was true or not, and that was General Jimmy Doolittle. Now, that's a picture of him taking off on the aircraft carrier to bomb Japan, and that letter right there, 2 pages, he was the only one to take the time to write me a letter saying we all make mistakes. The important thing is you profit from your mistakes. And we've always been friends since then. I didn't see him that often. And when his wife died, he moved to Carmel and lived by himself. And he would talk to my mom about every month. They were very close. So I knew that the only way for Jimmy Doolittle was with my mom. Now, have you heard me tell this story before?
I think on a previous interview, yeah. That he knew, he liked your mum, is that right?
What?
Did he like your mum?
Yeah.
Yeah, he did, yeah.
I told her what I needed, and it took her about 4 or 5 months to work up her courage. And so next time Jimmy called her, she said, Jimmy, John's getting involved in some stuff, and I don't know really whether it's a good thing or a bad thing, but I would like to know if Majestic was real. And he said, yes, Moy, it was, but I can't talk anything about it. And that was what set me off forever on UFOs, because I knew that Jimmy was telling the truth. That meant that Majestic was real. That meant that the briefing was probably real. And that's what set me off. And
how old was you at that time, do you
think?
That
was 1986, so that was, I would have been 44.
44, yeah.
43.
43 when you got sick. Yeah.
And it was that word from Jimmy Doolittle that that I was convinced now that most of the stuff we heard was true.
So people watching this then, how do they use discernment to see what's true and what's not true? How does someone watching this, you know, in the whole ufology community, in your work as well, how do they discern?
I don't know. You want to know how I discern?
Well, how do you discern then?
Well, give me a for instance.
Okay.
Phil Schneider. Now, Phil Schneider was up here 2 or 3 times, showed me his wounds, told me the story. It had to be bullshit because he was never in the firefight, because there was no firefight. It was an accident. Bob read about it at S4, and what happened is an EVE was giving a lecture to 44 scientists, and it was a small auditorium, and a Delta Force guy walked in there by accident. Everybody had been briefed, you don't wear sidearms or carry ammunition.
Is this Dulce, the story of Dulce?
Yeah, in Dulce.
In Dulce.
You don't wear sidearms or carry ammunition anywhere near your beat because you will be killed instantly. So when the Delta Force guy walked in there, the EV killed him instantly. When they saw it on the monitor from the Delta headquarters, they all went down there en masse. And there was, let's see, 22, I think 21 of them. And they went down there to take revenge, and the ET not only killed 20 with him, but all the 44 scientists. And that was known as the, I think, I don't know what it was known as, but people have called it the Dulce Wars. There was no war, it was an accident. And Bob read a summary of what I just told you at S4 in one of the briefings. The only difference, the one he read, it didn't say Dulce. As a matter of fact, it didn't say anything. But the reason I don't think that they left Dulce out, I don't think his clearance was to the level that he was allowed to know about Dulce. But I have 2 friends there that work there, and so, you know, I know it's true.
Yeah, I mean, when you look at the Mark Richards story, for example, he talks about him and his dad went down there to you know, have a firefight at Dulce, but I don't believe that.
No,
no,
impossible.
Yeah.
And the way I learned about Dulce was in 1987. I was invited to Crestone, Colorado, by a group of 7 ufologists who were meeting to trade information. And there was Tom Adams, Linda Moulton-Howe, and what was his name? There were 4 other guys. And we traded information for a couple of nights. And then Linda Howe and I drove down to Albuquerque. I had my truck, she didn't have any transportation. But during this meeting, Tom Adams came up to me and says, "John, I got this letter from somebody in Henderson. I can't get back there to Las Vegas. Would you take care of it?" And I said, "Sure." So he handed me the letter from Cherry Hinkle, and it was that she had a friend that worked at Dulce, and there were tile hallways that went on forever. And da-da-da-da-da. So when I got back here, I contacted her and then developed a relationship with her where she eventually showed me the pen and ink drawings that she, the pencil drawings, which I still have right here. She drew me of the pictures of Dulce that the guard had taken. And I made felt tip pen copies of those pencil drawings, distributed them as the Dulce papers. Those are the famous Dulce papers. I wish I had put my name on it, but I didn't.
And you've got so much files here. There's so much information tucked away in this room. When you're not with us one day, which will be a sad day, but when you're not, what do you want done with all of your files, all of your info? Where would you
all my UFO stuff is on the hard drive back of this computer, and I've told them when I kick off, take that to a different place. What nobody knows is I gave most of my files I sent back to North Carolina for my daughter Jax to take care of. And so when I'm not here, she'll know what to do with them.
Right.
So those things are protected.
Good. What do you want people to look back on your legacy as? What do you want your legacy in this field to be, would you say?
To live your life with integrity, without envy, hate, or greed.
Well, that's 4 things, and there's some great things there. I know we're out of time right now, okay, because this has been nearly 2 hours now, and I know we've missed out a lot of information, but there's loads of previous interviews that you've done on other shows that if people want to continue to dig into the archives, it's all there. Well, I just want to thank you for allowing me to interview you, if you give me permission to do that, and just thank you for the information that you've shared as well.
Okay, and I want to thank you for the information on Mark Richards. That is really very, very good.
Thank you. Thank you.